Hear me? Woo! That's good. Thank you all for coming. Let's hope this all goes to plan. The music you just heard was a little bit of K-pop called from the artist New Jeans, who was one of the few bands that performed at our opening and closing ceremony. But anyway, thank you for all coming. And before I start, I think I should just say a little bit about what a jamboree is. So the 25th World Scout Jamboree was held in South Korea, and it was a place where 40,000 scouts from all over the world joined together to basically celebrate scouting and have almost like a festival experience where we got to meet lots of people. And the site was held in Simangung, which is at the bottom of South Korea by the coast, on some reclaimed land. So it took about 32 hours to get there from when we left Birmingham at about 8 o'clock in the morning to when we arrived in Korea, in Seoul, 32 hours later in the evening, with a short stopover in Dubai Airport. So this is what we should have done when we were over there. We should have spent a day in Seoul, and then we would have travelled down to the site for about 13 days, and then travelled back up to Seoul for another 5 days of sightseeing. Next slide, please. So before our jamboree, my jamboree experience, we explored Seoul just to kind of get our bearings for the first day. So on our first day, we walked up along a little river up to the National Palace, which you can see in the top photograph. And that's a huge palace. It was where the royal family used to live, which they later abolished. But it has quite a lot of cultural significance, and that is just the opening gate. So as soon as you go through those gates, there are more buildings and palaces behind it. It was an absolute stunning place. After that, on our way up to that, we also managed to see lots of Australians, Swiss, and even Indonesian scouts who were also sightseeing all these places before we headed down to the Jamboree. But later that day, we were given some very sad news that unfortunately, due to the site not being ready yet, we would have to wait another day. This was quite scary for us because at points on social media, there'd been a lot of negative images floating around, and we didn't quite know which ones were true. So they told us we'd have to wait another day, like most Western countries. But being scouts, we bounced back, and we made most of our second day going to a war memorial. So the next day was the National War Memorial of Korea, where we spent learning about the history and the conflicts between North and South Korea. And then following that, a group of friends, we decided to go on a little stroll from our hotel up to another war memorial kind of park, and went off and saw the Myeongdong Cathedral, which is the photograph on the bottom of the page. And that's about the same size of St. Peter's for kind of scale, that little cathedral, so it was quite nice. Right, next slide, please. So this is the main thing. We were on site for 3 days, 3 full days, or 2 full days, and then we had 2 half days either side of it. So we arrived at camp and we quickly set up, from putting our pallets down where we set up our camp to making sure we had all the cooking equipment set up. And then after that, due to it being the second day, it was the day of the opening ceremony. So as you can see in the top photograph, we all paraded in to the opening ceremony. Unfortunately, due to the heat and the unorganised filtering of people into the opening ceremony, only 6 of us actually managed to get into the opening ceremony, and many had to turn back and go back to the site, which was a shame. So a group of us managed to wiggle our way through the crowds, and we met up with another unit from the UK who had also lost their leaders, and we managed to squeeze our way into the front of the opening ceremony, where Bear Grylls gave his famous opening speech talk about scouting, as well as officially opening the site. And after that, we had a couple more talks from people like the president of South Korea, which was very cool to think that the president had the time to put away to go and speak to all these scouts. After that, the opening ceremony kind of finished with lots of art and music, and also like taekwondo events, as it's the national martial arts of Korea. Right at the end, as you can see in the photo it would be your photo down there. It would be is a drone show. We had a big drone show showing kind of the history of Scouts. And back a slide, please. And we had, right at the end, there was a talk from Lord Baden-Powell, who was the founder of the Scouting. And before he died, he recorded his voice, and that was then played with a large face of him giving his message. So on the next day, we explored the site a little bit, just to kind of make friends. So we made friends with the Mexicans and Bangladeshis that were camped right next to us. And unfortunately, due to the extreme weather, we were told we would have to wait in our camp until 3 o'clock because the UK deemed it too dangerous to be wandering around site in the extreme heat. But as soon as it hit 3 o'clock, me and my group of friends, we all raced to one end of this massive site, which was about 3 miles long, and we raced to one end of it to try and catch the activities. But as soon as we got up to the activities, we had to turn around as they were shut. So, despite that, we managed to do lots of swapping of items. A big part of the Jamboree is, on top of meeting all these people, is actually trading items with these people. And this is when I remember I've left my blanket outside, but I have a big blanket of all the badges that I've managed to swap. Yes, please. There's a big blanket of all these badges that I managed to swap with people. I also managed to swap my... Thank you, Lucy. As you can see on one side, there's all these badges from all these different countries and other UK units, as well as other bits and bobs. If you want to have a look at that, it'll be on, as you come out, you can just have a look at it. So we traded lots, and then to conclude the first evening off, we had a big disco with all sorts of different countries, which was really cool to see how everyone, even though we couldn't speak the same language, we could all have fun dancing and having a great time at this disco. So on the second day, we went to the SDGs talk. Due to none of the activities being open, we went to a little talk about Sustainable Development Goals and what Scouting was trying to do with that. And then after that, I went to some more exhibitions held by other countries about what Scouting can be and how Scouting can help the environment and all sorts of stuff. And then I kind of finished the day off with some more trading with other people and just kind of generally meeting people and being sociable. And then to finish the night off with another disco, because it was amazing. And unfortunately, about 11 o'clock that night, we noticed our leaders were quite nervous because they'd just been to a meeting which had been told that we would unfortunately be leaving the site as it wasn't quite up to standard, and that we could be evacuated in the next 48 hours depending on our situation. So, yeah. So we had to leave the next day. So, next slide, please. So, why did we have to leave? I'm sure many of you know we had to leave, and quite often the media portrayed it as it was very, very hot. Of course, it was outstandingly hot at about 40 degrees. You couldn't stay in your tent past about 7:30 without being turned into a roast chicken. So, but on top of that, there was worries of diseases, bad sanitation, lack of food, and about 800 people a day going to the hospital, with ambulances constantly going past our campsite, which wasn't best. In the photographs you can see, this was about 6 o'clock in the morning. That was what the rubbish site was looking like. and it definitely shouldn't be like that on the first day at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then the shade tunnels, which weren't very shady at all, but they did spray a nice mist, so all was good. I have just removed some of the photos of the grim toilets, so you don't have to see those. But the lack of food was quite concerning, as a few of our people had dietary requirements, and those who were gluten-free were eating a pita breads for breakfast, lunch and dinner, with maybe cornflakes if they were lucky. So we got quickly evacuated to the site, and I think that was really an outstanding achievement from the UK Scouting, how quickly they could get us back into safety of Seoul. So next slide, please. So yeah, here are some people I met on kind of going that way to that way. There was some Bangladesh, followed by a Latvian girl, followed by a Taiwan girl, followed by a Sri Lankan girl, followed by a K-pop group, and at the airport we met some Brazilians and some Pakistanis, and then finally at the closing ceremony we took a photo with a guard with a dog, because why not? So those are just a few of the people I met. Right, next slide please. So after being quickly evacuated back to Seoul, we were driven back to Seoul, but we didn't actually quite know where we were going. We were just told we were being driven to Seoul, and luckily a hotel put us up. So we were very grateful to them. Yeah. So they told us that it was going to be a Jamboree 2.0 in Seoul. So we weren't going to be missing out on the Jamboree, as they were basically relocating it to Seoul for all the UK and the Americans as well, because they also had to leave. And so did the Singapore. They also left, but unfortunately, due to their financial stability, they had to fly home, so they couldn't spend the rest of their time in Seoul. But as part of our Jamboree 2.0, we went to a traditional village, as you can see in kind of the middle photograph, which was very nice, and we got to see, again, the culture and history. And to all of our surprises, from presidential order, we managed to go around the Blue House. And the Blue House is the equivalent of the White House. Funny that. They just kind of changed the name, changed the colour, and it is in fact blue. So who'd have guessed? And that is a photograph of me standing where he would give his kind of speeches, where the president would give his speeches. So yeah, I was quite happy with that, and we also got to walk around. But it was quite big news because not many people get to go around the Blue House. So he made it onto national television, and that is me on national television. So go me, so famous. But yeah, and then the next day we went to a Taekwondo show, again put on by a local theatre company, who invited us out, and we got to see some amazing Taekwondo events, which was actually really interesting because it's kind of a mixed martial arts and theatre kind of mashed together. It's really, really cool. And then to conclude the day off from the Taekwondo event, we got to see some music. So at our hotel, the hotel had organised a music event who they brought in local artists who sung some original songs in Korean, and there was one guy who shared for us his love of Harry Styles. So we're all quite happy with that. And then later that evening, after we'd have thought we'd been musicking out, but we weren't, so we decided to go to a rock club. But we didn't realise the rock club was 18 plus, so we kind of wandered up and we got offered a round of drinks, which we politely declined, being the moral citizens we were. And then about 20 minutes later, we got asked to leave as we weren't over 18. But that didn't stop us on our music journey. We then wandered down the road to a local jazz club, which we were allowed into. All right, next slide. So another big event that hit was the typhoon. So at this point, everyone at the Jamboree site had to be evacuated. So now it wasn't just the UK and the US was displaced, it was every other 180 nations that were at the Jamboree had to evacuate to Seoul, so anywhere from churches to university dormitories were putting these people up. In some ways, we were really lucky as we got there first before everyone else had to be evacuated. I mean, we were still in rooms of about 5. But we all managed to fit on these beds. It was quite comical because we all were like sardines in this big bed. So there the typhoon hit, and it was quite stormy weather, really quite bad. But the UK had put on some hotel activities in a hotel which was fairly close to where we were staying. So we hopped on the bus and drove down in really dangerous conditions. I don't know how the bus driver still managed to drive and look completely normal. But we got there nice and safely, and we did some kind of team building activities at this hotel with the UK units, which was really fun. And we also got to meet a few of the international service team and volunteers from the UK who were also staying at that hotel. So it was nice to kind of see some old faces again. So after we did that, we kind of came back for lunch, as we were told due to the typhoon, we were going to be on lockdown till from about 7 o'clock onwards. We weren't allowed to leave our hotel and have an overnight bag packed in case of evacuation. So we were told to eat our main meal at lunch. So we were wandering around trying to find places to eat, and we must have gone to about 3 or 4 different places to eat. Each was shut, so we're like, you know what, we're fed up with trying to just find a place. We'll walk down one road until we find somewhere that's open. So we stumbled into this place, and it just looked like a normal pork and noodles kind of shop. These are common all over Korea, so we're like, yes, finally some nice pork and noodles. And we walked in, we ordered, and when you order, quite often they'll have the Korean writing, and then underneath they'll have a translation. So we're like, yes, it's pork, amazing, until afterwards we were halfway through eating our meal, and must have been going on for about 10 minutes about how this pork was so delicious and so tender and how it fell off the bone, until one of my mates decided he would scan the Korean translation into English to see what was actually being eaten, if there was like some sort of special name for it. And it turned out we were eating dog. So, yeah, that was quite an amusing day. Needless to say, there was about 10 of us, so it must have been a whole dog between us all. So, what a story. So, to pass the time, there was a roller skating rink across the road from our hotel, so we went roller skating and then headed off to bed, where we just watched some TV and films. Bugsy Malone in Korean is quite interesting because you can kind of tell what they're saying, but at the same time it's very different. But never know. So the next day we had to move hotels over into more central Seoul, where we were originally meant to be staying, as this was the day of the official Jamboree kind of ending. And due to everyone leaving, they changed the closing ceremony location to the World Cup Stadium, which I thought was really cool, as well that could accommodate 40,000 people with ease. So they put it on there, and we got to see so many different faces and got to meet up with some people, the Mexicans that were camping next to us, and the Bangladesh and the Italians that were all kind of camping next to us. We all got to meet them again, as well as meeting more people before we left. And there they had more talks about what's going to happen, about scouting, and followed by some music events, and finally concluding of them passing over this, like passing over the Olympic torch, and they passed over a neckerchief to show where the next location is going to be, which is in Poland in 2027. So that should be good fun over there. So we finished that day off with some quite big K-pop stars, such as New Jeans, and then went home to go to bed. That was a long day. Everyone was very exhausted on that day, especially with travelling in the subway. But the next day, even though the Jamboree had ended, we were still busy as ever, and we went to an animation studio to see where they kind of did Korean animation, and Turns out it's very similar to UK animation, but Wallace and Gromit once had an episode over in Korea, which I thought was quite interesting. And on top of it, next to the animation studio, there's a studio about robots and how they use robots in animation, and I thought that was very cool. Could I please have the next slide, possibly? So then we went to Legoland, which I'm sure many of you may or may not have been to the Legoland in Windsor. It's very, very similar. They've kind of got rides and loads of Lego. And in the middle of Windsor, they have like a replica of London. But in this one, they have a replica of Seoul. So you can kind of get to see the scale of this Lego Seoul just kind of being built. And it's very, very interesting. And the views and the fireworks were, again, amazing. After that, we went, the next day, we went to a 4D maze, which was a bit weird. We didn't kind of know what a 4D maze in an alive museum is. Turns out a 4D maze isn't as extravagant as it sounds, but it was still really cool. It was more of a sensory kind of maze, so you would get to walk through and they might blow wind. There was like mirrors. Some rooms had mirrors where you like a mirror maze. Some had like a ball pit, so you were just like walking through like meters of balls. Other times it was like big foam things dangling from the ceiling which you had to navigate through, and obstacle courses and nets and stuff you got to climb through. And then we went to the Alive Museum, which was a museum, but it was quite an interactive museum where you got to take photos next to all these kind of images, so you could make yourself look like you were Superman, or you got to make yourself look like you're being eaten by a giant. Or in one of the photos, I'm seen walking down essentially like a railway track, and in another one, there's a photo due to optical illusions, I am a lot taller than this other guy who is probably about 6'3". He's an absolute giant, yet due to the perspection, I'm looking absolutely massive and towering over him in the bottom photograph. And then finally, they had a trading and events day in Seoul, in the centre of Seoul again, where we managed to go over to and we did some traditional Korean games, such as Dogoni, which is like the tracing of like, you have a little cookie and you're meant to kind of cut the cookie out. You had another one where you had to throw like spears and sticks into a very kind of small pot. There was another one where, I'm going to demonstrate this, so bear with me. So you have a little square that's on the floor, and then you get another square and you have to do this, and hopefully it flips the square over. And then you had another game where it was like keepy uppies with, it was a small bag of like coins with like a tassel over it, and it was about that big or so, and you got to do keepy uppies with that. But on top of that, we got to meet some more people from different countries. So I got to make a friendship bracelet with some Germans that were also over there, and some more Taiwanese people that would just happen to be kind of at the same Jamboree event at the same time, which was really nice, just to kind of see more Scouts again. It was so amazing how, even though we weren't on the same site, and we were in Seoul, which is a humongous city, we would still bump into Scouts all over the place. And after making all that, there was also some more music, which who doesn't love a bit of K-pop? Next slide, please. And then we went to the Nansam Tower, which is the big tower, as you can see on the photograph, and that is the highest kind of man-made point in Korea. And it's a big viewing platform, so you have to walk up this big hill, and then you go up a big tower, and you just get 360 views around Seoul. And it's actually breathtaking to see kind of like the city and the river and all the lights. And we were up there just before sunset. So we got to see the sunset set over Seoul, which is just magical. And then on top of when we were walking around the actual observatory, I bumped into some Latvians, and there were all sorts of other UK scouts, but there were some Latvian scouts who I got talking to as well. The next day, we had lunch with Our House, and Our House were the caterers for the Jamboree, and I'm guessing they felt quite guilty, but maybe it was out of generosity because obviously they'd probably tried their hardest to make sure the catering was amazing at the Jamboree site, but it wasn't due to the lack of food, and dietary requirements were, even though they said, and we pre-ordered our food for the Jamboree, and then we got parcels which we'd make the food, but unfortunately you never actually knew what you got. You just kind of got given a crate of food and were like, yes, here's some food, you can make what you like with it. But they invited us to their headquarters and basically put on this big buffet for all sorts of scouts. As you can see, I've just kind of loaded my plate up with loads of food, and they kind of showed us all sorts of styles of food, from Italian to traditional Korean food, of like gimbap and kimchi, as well as traditional British food. It was really weird having fish and chips for the first time in Korea. It was like, tell you what though, the Britain knows how to do fish and chips correctly. Like, it was good, but not as good as UK. So I think we're still holding that win. But after they've given us lunch, they gave us some activities we could do. So they taught us how to make kimchi, which is like fermented vegetables, which they'll eat with breakfast, lunch and dinner. It's really good for you, but you just got to remember, if you're going to start eating kimchi, you've got to ease yourself into it, otherwise you will be sitting on the toilet for the next couple of days, as many of our friends discovered when we were in the Jamboree. And we also got told how to make gimbap, which is like sushi, so it's kind of very similar, rice with the seaweed, but instead of just having like one or two fillings, they'll stuff it full of egg, spinach, kimchi, meats, vegetables. It's just rammed full of goodness. And then also, they did some more traditional Korean games, which I didn't get to experience because I was going around LG's headquarters. So LG's headquarters were 5 minutes away from Our House's headquarters. So LG invited a handful of scouts, about 20 of us from the whole of the Our House event, which must have had a couple hundred scouts there. So I was one of 3 or 4 from my unit who managed to go around LG headquarters. And that was actually really interesting because not only did LG make phones and TVs, I also found out they make robots. As you can see in one corner, there's a robot cooking noodles. On top of, they also have a big beauty and cosmetic line where you can buy growth enhancement hormones. So for all you short people, obviously these work, and you could take their growth hormones. So instead of being 5'2", you could be 6'4" by the end of the year. So obviously we need to buy those. And they also make car parts for all sorts of electronic car companies. And then to finish the day off, we walked around some lovely little botanical gardens, which was quite pleasant. And they had these little houses for bugs. Next slide, please. So the DMZ, this is possibly one of the most important parts of Korea and one of the most important parts of our Jamboree, as every UK Scout went. And I think most Scouts went from all over the country, because from all over the world went to this part, because this is where no man's land is between North and South Korea. So we got taught about the history of North and South Korea, as well as actually going into no man's land to kind of see how they were living in 1950s when the war and the conflict was on, showing all us about the radio and the bunkers, and it was quite an unsettling place. There was nothing quite like it. Like, it was so kind of surreal, yet you just had that constant chill down your spine that you knew fighting was just going on, and still you can just feel there's very much a tension there. As when we went in, it's still very heavily restricted. Not anyone can just wander in and out. We were escorted by armed police, or not even armed police, just the army were escorted into it, and kind of kept with the whole time, so we couldn't just walk around, and we were very much guided through this. And we got to hang a ribbon by the observatory where you can kind of look over to North Korea, and you can see the North Korea quite often play songs, and they have a big horn which basically plays the North Korean national anthem as what they kind of described as an intimidation tactic, but we don't really know what happens. And so you can see all the way over to the north side. So it's a really, really interesting place showing the history of North and South Korea. And we got to tie little ribbons on to show peace. But I thought this is an interesting fact. So in the DMZ, one of the few things that is actually built there is a theme park, a really big theme park. Hasn't been touched, hasn't been opened, hasn't even been tested, I don't think. So I don't know how well it would work. But hopefully, they hope that Korea will once again be reunited. And the first thing that will happen when they open up the border for North Koreans to come through, they will be able to go on this theme park and have fun and experience fun in the southern side, which is really, really interesting to show their hope. But that was the DMZ, and that took almost a full day to do. It was really stunning. At the back, kind of as you walk out, I have 2 booklets to just a bit of information about the DMZ if you want to read through that, and Camp Grievous, which was the particular part we were looking at. And then on the almost second to last day, we went around Gangnam, and I'm sure some of you might have heard of the song Gangnam Style. That was based in Gangnam, so the song is basically how they did everything in Gangnam, which is kind of a neighbourhood in Seoul. That is perfectly timed. Thank you. So that's the song. Hopefully it jogged your memory. And there's a very famous dance with hands kind of going like that, and to kind of commemorate that, they built these big brass, I think it's brass, and bronze statues, which I kind of stood under and got a photo with, as well as they had this big shopping centre. It's absolutely huge, but instead of just being shops, in the centre of this huge shopping centre, to give you a scale of how big this was, you had 2 train stations, 2 subway stations. You had 1 subway station at one side of this at this shopping centre, and there was also another subway station at the other end, because at point, if you're at one end, you want to get to the other end, you're almost faster hopping on the subway to get you through rather than having to wiggle your way through this big shopping centre. But there was a massive library, and you can just see the books towering up, and what you would do is you'd type on the computer what book you want, and it would suction it, and it would go and pop you out a book, which I thought was quite cool. And then to conclude the day off, we went to a baseball game, which, because of how much influence America had on it, baseball was really quite big in there. But I don't know how good they were, or whether baseball's just really difficult, because I think they may have only hit the ball about 4 times. So, but what we found out, it's quite a sociable game. It's not like football where everyone's kind of standing on their seats, it's very fast-paced, or basketball where everyone's kind of really intently watching it. This is more of a social way. It might be on in the background, and you're just having a conversation with your friends. So that was what we did. And then on the last day, we went round another museum of modern Korea, and then concluded the day off by wearing some of the traditional clothing. There were some male traditional clothing, but they looked really, really boring. So, in true Scout style, about half the lads decided we'll dress up in the dresses, as that is zoomed in there. There must have been about, I think about 20 of the lads. We got a big photo of us all just lined up in all these big flowy dresses in front of the palace again, which was great fun. And then we travelled home. So, yeah. Next slide, please. So, what have I learned? So to conclude this off with, us scouts, we're really resilient, and no matter how bad the situation gets, I think we always knew we could make the best of it, and we knew we couldn't change what was happening. So many of us were crying at points, and it was like, but we kind of ultimately knew we couldn't just sit around moping about kind of what it could have been. We just have to bounce back and really make use of the situation. So even if there wasn't anything planned for that day, rather than just sitting in a hotel, we could go around and just go and explore Seoul for the beautiful city it was, which helped us kind of overcome challenges and how to work under pressure, like trying to traverse such an intricate subway system that Seoul is. It was quite intuitive. They had a big app which you could use, and it would tell you where to get on and where to get off, and it was really easy to use. But sometimes, I remember there was one point, and it was about 3 o'clock, and I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and I gotten off the subway with a friend, and I was leading them to Gangnam, and we had to change line, which was fine until I hopped off the stop, but I forgot we had to change line, so we went outside, and I was quite panicky because I thought we'd gotten off at the wrong stop, completely forgetting that we just had to change line. So we definitely had to work under pressure, especially when evacuating and adapting. And South Korea is a very, very different culture to the UK, and their respect and manners to everyone is just outstanding. So no matter where you were, everyone was really polite. People, notably, we were having pizza, and we got chatting to some Koreans who could speak a bit of English because they'd came and studied over in the UK, and they had conversations with us, and they shared their meal, and it was like, oh, this is really nice. And then another point, a friend left their pencil at a restaurant, and no one in the UK, if you'd have left their pencil, no one would have thought 2 seconds of it. But this time, the manager came out running to try and give us back a pencil, which I just thought was so nice. And even on our first day, when we were struggling with our language barrier, when we first arrived in Korea, there was a lovely girl who studied in Manchester who helped us translate to this, to the staff who were working on how to get our meal. And it was just lovely to see how everyone is really nice to each other, and especially on the subway, where on the subway they have about 3 or 4 seats reserved for elderly, disabled, and a special seat for pregnant women. And no matter how busy it gets, it could be 5 o'clock, rush hour, and you'll be standing like sardines, you'll be ram-packed full, and then there'll be these 4 seats, which no one will sit on, and it's amazing. And I have a very, very fond memory of this because an elderly couple got on, and this old man, who was probably in about his 80s, refused to sit down, and his wife had to keep continuously telling him to sit down and flicked him on the ear multiple times to sit down because you deserve to sit. And I just thought it was really quite amazing. Next slide. So does anyone know what the Scout motto is? Next bit. Yeah, well done. Dad, next bit. But nothing could have prepared us for this. It was an amazing experience. Next slide. Thank you. Any questions? No? Thank you. Oh, yes? Wait, give me a second. At the front. Say that again, please.
Did the Chief Scout come to visit you?
Yes, so the Chief Scout came to visit on the first day at the opening ceremony. Bear Grylls, the Chief Scout, opened, and he brought a big kind of star with him, and he walked up these steps very drenched in sweat, walked up these stairs and kind of opened and said some very nice words. Jackie, did you have a question?
Did you manage to grasp any of the language while you were there?
Yes, I did manage to learn a little bit of Korean before I left, and once I was over there, I could speak a few phrases. So I got quite good at saying thank you and hello. Hello is 안녕하세요. Annyeonghaseyo, or Annyeong for short, but you had to know when it was appropriate to use which phrase, depending on whether you were speaking to your friend, someone in the street, or an elderly person. And then Kamsahamnida was thank you. And we picked up phrases like, could I please have, which I can't remember, and another kind of like short phrases, like I think where's the subway? I think I also learned but we were never short from a subway, about 100 metres at all point. Any other questions? Neil?
Did you ever get to the bottom of the planning issues around it? I certainly feel people like typhoon is just bad luck, but the hot weather's predictable.
Yeah, so hot weather it's been on the rise in Korea for months, for years, sorry. So they kind of knew hot weather was going to be there, and it was mostly poor planning on the sites. So the site wasn't ready. It was built on reclaimed land, which they thought they would have ready, but it wasn't. It was like rubbing. It was so sandy, and every time you put sun cream on it, it was like rubbing grit into you. But and to combat the heat, they had shade tunnels, which they thought would help, but they didn't grow in time, and they quite often blamed on the heat, especially the lack of sanitation. Was they had a cleaning company who were meant to clean the toilets 3 or 4 times a day, and they were meant to have proper toilet blocks built and proper showers. The showers were something else. It was a big concrete slab with a table in the middle where you put your gear, and to separate the showers was just like a white tarpaulin. So you couldn't tell if someone was in there. It was like a risk every time you wanted to go for a shower. And no hot water, so they were freezing. But they say quite often it stemmed from COVID, which it was years ago, so some people were quite, how does that, they can't always blame it on COVID. But another point of that is, I think quite often what happened was, in Korea they had families and young people sector in the government, which then got abolished, but no one kind of double-checked that the Jamboree came underneath that. So when they kind of removed that, all the Jamboree was kind of dished up between other sectors, so it got past hands. So I guess that again stopped the flow of it working amazingly. So it was just disorganisation and not getting it passed on correctly. Any other questions?
Would you go again?
100%. If you do have the opportunity to visit Korea, I highly encourage it. The food's amazing. Yes, even the dog. But you'll be happy to know, for you dog lovers, they are indeed banning it, and they're in the process of banning it by 26, I think, giving the farmers who breed dogs for a living a way to transition away from that. But anyway, the dog isn't commonly eaten. As much as people think, it's usually eaten about 3 times a year, on the hottest day of the year, on the hottest points of the year, for long life, I think is what they eat it for. Yeah, but I highly encourage you to go. Everywhere's lovely, everyone's amazing. At the back, as you wander out, I do have some kind of bits and bobs kind of scattered around, as Mal is kind of pointing to. I have a bag, I have a jumper, I have multiple neckers, hats, other bits and bobs, and I have a couple leaflets from a few of the museums and the DMZ if you'd like to have a look at that. And Mum is very expertly donning the blanket if you want to have a closer look at that. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. It was interesting, it was exciting, it was funny, it was informative. It wasn't too long.
That's good. Sorry, I didn't try not to waffle.
You did a brilliant job, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for representing us and representing the Scouts back to us.
Well, thank you very much.
Well done.
Well, thank you for supporting me. Well, thank you for supporting me. I couldn't have gone without all of your help.
Just don't go next year.